Okay, we are live from near the New River in Southwest Virginia. I'd start with my music. I'll try to end with the music on the podcast today. But the last time I did this on the road, the internet blinked out when I did the music. It's just all too much for it to handle. And so I'm just going to skip it this time. We're going to get right into the podcast and see how we do. And hopefully you can hear me okay and all is going well. Now, I'll tell you this. I put the seatbelt in here. How many times have people had an accident trying to put on their seatbelt? Thought it was happened a zillion times. So, off to a little bit of a bad start because of my cigar, which I did the V cut on one end. I lit the V cut side instead of the other side. So, but it's okay. It all works out the same. It seems to be smoking just fine, and you guys shouldn't have too much trouble. Now, the last time I did this car trip podcasting thing, my friend said the audio was fine. I was not happy with the audio, so I'm going to try to talk in a little bit softer of a voice so it doesn't seem like I'm shouting. But I had it clipped on the seatbelt last time, which is a little bit lower than my mouth. Now I've got it clipped on the left side of my beard, which you can probably barely see. And if I just didn't say anything, I could probably get away with it. But being who I am, I'm just going to lay it out there. And, if the whole game of life is not to look dumb, I'm in bad shape. So, if it looks dumb, it looks dumb. But if you hear better, then it's better for everyone. Okay, I'm running for Congress. Dean Arnold for Congress. This is the Dean Arnold podcast. Give to my campaign at deanarnoldforcongress.com. I'd like you to share and subscribe this, and I'd like you to know that I am bringing sanity to an insane world. Now, we are up in southwestern Virginia because I did a golf trip this weekend, and southwest Virginia is close to my heart. First of all, I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, near Salem, Virginia. They're kind of twin cities. But also, I discovered a little bit later that I'm descended from Stephen Arnold, my seventh great-grandfather, who founded first settler of Arnold's Valley in southwest Virginia, just south of Lexington, Virginia, and just north of Roanoke. And so my people, Stephen, James, and John Arnold, father, son, and grandson, they lived up there for 30-some years. First mention we have of them is 1742. And but we'll get to that because I'm jumping the gun. But anyway, my people were up here, but there was someone else up here right around the same time, and they probably knew each other. But her name was Mary Draper, or Mary Ingalls, or Mary Ingalls Draper. And she is an extraordinary woman who lived just south of my people, Stephen, a few years after Stephen got there. They had a ferry over the New River, and they got abducted by Indians. The Indians killed some relatives, took her captive 500 or 600 miles up the river into Ohio. She escaped, came all the way back, and 5 or 6 months later returned to her home. It's an extraordinary story. So I'm going to tell you the story today. The topic today is the story of Mary Ingalls Draper. Extraordinary woman. All right. Scripture of the day, saint of the day. Scripture of the day. For the epistle, we're going to do 1 Corinthians 11, the last verse, then the first couple verses of 1 Corinthians 12. You'll have to pull it up because I don't have the technology or the ability while I'm driving down the road to pull up the passages for you. But the passage basically says that Paul was running from the authorities because they were trying to kill him. And so late at night, the believers found a rope and let him down outside the wall, down the rope, the city wall, in order to escape. Live to fight another day. Interesting passage. Tells us a couple things. Tells us that Paul was persecuted, and there's another epistle on the calendar today that where Paul goes into great length about how he was beaten and tortured and stoned, left for dead, always getting persecuted here and there. And along with that, the burden of the churches. He loved the churches so much, and he's praying all the time for the churches. That's an interesting little add-on. But anyway, the point being here, I'm going in the right direction. I think I am. Anyway, then he has this thing where he escapes to live another day, getting let down on a rope. Oh, someone is trying to call me in the middle of a podcast, and I'm going to push that right there, and I think that's going to get rid of them. It did. Good. All's well. But that just tells us that, sometimes people just want to lay down. Just forget it all. Just going to lay down. If they're going to kill us, they're going to kill us. If there's going to be nuclear war, there's going to be nuclear war. Let's just forget it all. I just don't care. No. Live to fight another day. Sometimes you do some stuff prepping. This is a great example. You prep because you might have to go through some tough times and live to fight another day. That's what Paul did. He was let down that rope. He could have just said, oh, well, the governor's after me and they're coming to get me and it's inevitable and there's nothing I can do. No. He had the believers let him down outside the wall on a rope in the middle of the night, and he got away. So none of this fatalistic, woe is me stuff. Get in there, fight. Looks like you're going to get cornered. Let yourself on a rope. Let yourself down on a rope. Live to fight another day. All right, that's good. Now, the verse right after that, which starts in chapter 12, is where Paul starts talking about how, in order to keep him humble, because, the guy's doing miracles every day and pretty easy to get puffed up, he said, God sent me what he called a thorn in the flesh so that I wouldn't be proud and haughty. Well, people have argued for generations, thousands of years, what is Paul's thorn in the flesh? What is he talking about? Some people think he had an eye problem, because in one place in the epistles, he says, look with what large letters I write, because he had an eye problem. Other people speculate other things. It was a sickness that couldn't be healed, which is kind of weird, because Paul's always healing everybody else. You think he'd be able to heal his own sickness, but life can be weird. But I'll tell you this story, and I'm not sure that I'm right. But one of the advantages of going to the Orthodox Church, and every Sunday morning we read an epistle, and we read a gospel passage, just like I do for you guys here on this daily podcast. They read the epistle and the gospel of the day every Sunday morning. Well, today it's a long passage, and you can look it up. But it's a long passage, couple of chapters, 3 chapters. Well, if you read it, it just goes on and on. The Jews came and persecuted me. The Jews came and stoned me. The Jews rounded up the governor and they tried to get me whipped. And they did get me whipped, and this, that, and the other. And then they came after me over here, and then there was riots, and they tried to storm the house that I was living in, and they just hounded me, and they hounded me, and they hounded me, and they're persecuting me, and these Jews are just after me, and they're just... Then he says, to keep me humble, God sent me a thorn in the flesh. So in the context, when I heard it that day, the whole large context of that verse, I was like, oh, well, his thorn in the flesh are these Jews that can't stand them, and they're constantly hounding them and persecuting them night and day and chasing them everywhere and inflicting pain on them whenever they can. That made sense to me. So in my opinion right now, that's what Paul's thorn in the flesh was. I'm happy to be corrected on that, but it's an interesting little insight. All right. Another epistle today on the calendar. That's about Paul. Next is about Peter. There's a reason why we have one about Peter and another about Paul, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the epistle for Peter is 1 Peter 3 through 9, And he says, hang in there, guys. God has got this inheritance for you that cannot fade away. It's incorruptible and undestroyable. You've got this inheritance coming. So have you thought about that? Have you thought about the fact that when you die, there's like this Elon Musk kind of money coming your way? Have you? Because that's what God says. And it's incorruptible. It can't be corrupted. It can't fade away. It can't be stolen. We are headed for an incredible inheritance. And he says, but you got some problems now you got to work through. So there's some momentary troubles and afflictions. But then he says this, he says, you have those so that your faith can be tested and tried and shown to be more pure than gold, which is tested by fire. So what's more important than gold and money and silver is your faith. More precious than gold, that faith. And first of all, because God loves your faith and he really cares about your faith, so that's why it's more precious. But also because literally you've got this huge inheritance coming, and if you stick with the faith, you're going to have this huge inheritance, which is more than Elon Musk is worth and more than having all the gold and silver in the world. So that's a pretty cool passage. There's one little thing about this passage that I want to make note of. I wrote a book about Chattanooga called Old Money, New South, about all the kind of billionaire families and they're intermarried, and it created quite a legacy for Chattanooga. It's a great book. I encourage you to get it and read it. Probably my most read book so far. But kind of a hero of the book. There's a lot of heroes, but one of the most extraordinary characters is a guy named Thomas Hook McCauley. And he was the pastor of the Keynote Church, First Presbyterian Church in Chattanooga, when the Civil War broke out in 1863 in Chattanooga. And the Yankee Army, I think first the Confederate Army comes marching in. And then the Yankee Army comes marching in. And he's asked, well, are you going to leave Chattanooga? Because all the other pastors had left Chattanooga. He says, I'm not leaving Chattanooga. This is my post. God's called me to Chattanooga. I'll be here whether I get killed or not. And he was true to his word. He was a young man at that time, he and his wife. And before he knew it, he came from a little bit of money, so he kind of had a large house. And before he knew it, there was soldiers sleeping in every square inch of his house, on the floor, the hallways and everything, because he wouldn't let it turn anybody away. And there's this other story where someone in his church stood up to give the pastoral prayer for that Sunday morning, and he bowed his head and started praying, and they heard a shell in the distance, and then heard some more shells, and people started leaving the church while he's praying. When he finally finishes his long prayer, he looks up and there's nobody in the church. Anyway, McCauley was an incredible guy, pastored the church for 50 years. Ended up, because of Coca-Cola bottling and manufacturing and other trends, he had all these, what today would be billionaires in his church. Extraordinary amount of billionaires in one church. And he put it to them. The reason you got all this money, boys, is to give it away. Give it to the kingdom. Give it to the larger kingdom, which is things like museums and the YMCA. It doesn't just have to be Christian stuff, but it also can be Christian stuff. Give, 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 give. And Chattanooga ultimately got to be known as one of the most generous cities in the country, according to the United Way and other places. So anyway, that's a cool story. So, the reason I bring this up is Thomas Hook McCauley, the very first sermon he ever preached in Chattanooga was on 1 Peter 1, 3-9. He talked about how your faith is more precious than gold, talking to all these rich people. And 50 years later, he retired, preached from the same sermon, 1 Peter 1, 3-9. And he told all these rich people, the reason you got all this money is to give it away, so be generous. So anyway, that verse is on the church calendar today, so that's pretty cool. All right, Gospels of the day. First Gospel of the day is John 21. This is after Peter. Jesus has fixed breakfast for Peter and John and the apostles, and asked Peter 3 times, do you really love me? And he says, yes, Lord, I love you. And then he and John are walking away somewhere. And Jesus says to Peter, you're going to get crucified upside down. It ain't going to be pretty. And Peter accepts his fate, but then he looks at John and he says, well, what about him? Pretty Christian thing to do, right? What about him? Isn't he going to get his comeuppance? And Jesus says, what does that matter to you? If I want him to stay until I return, then, that's what I want to happen. And John says, many people thought that I was not going to die until the Lord returned because Jesus said that, but Jesus didn't actually say that. He just said, what is it to you if that's what I want to do? So the rumor persisted that John was never going to die and was going to live until Jesus returned. Well, obviously that didn't happen. But the one other thing I want to leave with you on this particular topic is pretty much everybody assumed that John died in the early 90s, 80, 90. And that's because of the offhand comment by Irenaeus, which has translations and issues and other things. But I go into it deeply in my Revelation book project that I'm the editor of. I've got a 30-page appendix on the subject of when Revelation was written. I believe it was written around in the 60s, 80s, 60s. But yes, we are still lit. So, did John die in the 80s, 90s? Well, maybe not. James Jordan, who writes the commentary for this Revelation project, he seems to think that John died in the 80s, 60s. And I'm sort of agnostic on it. I'm okay with either view, but there is a view out there. There's a school of thought that John died early. There's like some document that talks about James and John being martyred together in AD 67, and there's some other hints like that John did die early. So we really don't know when John died. So just keep that in your pocket. All right. Second gospel passage of the day we'll discuss is Matthew 16. This one is about Peter again, and it's the famous passage where Peter confesses Christ as the Messiah, and Jesus says, okay, Simon, son of Jonah, because you said this, I'm going to call you the rock, and on this rock I will build my church. And it's a famous passage, and of course the Catholics use it to say that Jesus is the head of the entire church and everybody submits to him, and the Orthodox don't believe that. They believe that it's the confession that's the rock of the church, not Peter himself. And then I read a little argument that goes along with that I thought was pretty compelling. There's another place after the resurrection where Jesus has all the disciples in the room, and he says, receive the Holy Spirit. You'll be able to forgive sins and not forgive sins. And he says that to all the apostles, not just Peter. And in this gospel we're looking at today, Matthew 16, he says, on this rock I'll build my church, and I'll give you the keys of the kingdom, which has to do with forgiving sins or not forgiving sins. So we've got another passage where he says the same thing, but he says it to all the apostles. So that makes more sense to me. Uh-oh. We got to do some lighting. We got to not let anyone get hurt in the process. Okay? Go. All right, that's pretty good. Saint of the day, Christian hero. Today is a feast. It's a major Christian feast. There are 12 major Christian feasts on the Christian calendar. There's a bunch of minor Christian feasts. But today is the Feast of the Apostles. And on the Feast of the Apostles, we mainly focus on Peter and Paul. There's a 2-week fast leading up to this feast. We fast 40 days before Easter, 40 days before Christmas, and we got a couple others where we fast a couple of weeks, Transfiguration, the Dormition, and this one here, the Feast of the Apostles. So Orthodox Christians everywhere are going to liturgy on a Monday morning and then they're eating meat and dairy for the first time in a couple weeks, and they're pretty happy about it. Feast of Peter and Paul. All right, I got a few things to say about this. I love, there's an icon of Peter and Paul embracing. They got their cheeks against each other, I think. And but it's a really important image and icon for the Christian church. First of all, I think I'll start here. You know, you're in the book of Acts, and it's all about Peter. Peter preaches at the day of Pentecost, and then he goes and finds Simon the tanner, and I think he heals Tabitha, the maker of purple. Or no, she's the one who helps orphans, and then there's somebody else. Lydia is the maker of purple. And anyway, Peter's doing all these miracles. He's healing a blind man and a lame man, maybe just a lame man. It's all about Peter for the first 9 or 10 chapters. And then suddenly Peter just disappears. And then we get the story of Saul, who's trying to kill the Christians, and then Jesus appears to him on the road to Damascus, and he has this apparition of Christ, and he has this dramatic conversion, and he becomes this super Christian, going from killing the Christians to becoming a super Christian. And then the rest of the book of Acts, which is like 28 chapters, so 9 or 10 chapters, you know, it's all about Peter, and then the rest of the book is all about Paul. And we don't even really hear about Peter again. He gets one little offhand mention, and that is it. Now it's all about Paul. Well, that's crazy. And Paul writes like half the New Testament. Peter has, you know, first, second Peter, and all the rest of it's written by Paul. So, like out of nowhere, this guy Paul emerges. He didn't spend 3 years with Jesus. He didn't watch all of Jesus' miracles. He wasn't there for the crucifixion and the resurrection, like Peter was. And yet, we got a little problem with the microphone. Let's see if I can fix that. We'll do a little fixie here. And might not be able to hear me as well at this point, but anyway, so it's all about Peter and Paul, and Peter disappears. I think Paul describes himself as one untimely born. He just comes out of nowhere, and he's the key guy. Well, what's interesting about that is there's a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, Christian scholars, and so they don't like Paul. They just wish Paul didn't exist. Paul's got some tough things to say in his letters, his epistles. Got a lot of traditional stuff about male, female, and he's got a lot of hard stuff to say about the atonement, and he's just got some tough things to say. He's a man's man. He ain't nobody to be trifled with. Well, all these people just wish Paul didn't exist. And when you read the history of the New Testament times, it's almost like he doesn't exist until suddenly he just swoops in out of nowhere. So those people would just kind of like to focus on the Gospels and the first part of Acts and Peter and his friends, the disciples. But this Paul guy, get him out of here. Out of here. We don't want you. But this icon we have, I wish I could show it to you, but you can look it up. Icon of Peter and Paul. It's going to come up right for you. Very, very important traditional icon in the Orthodox Church, or in the church in general. Peter and Paul embracing each other. It's very important because this is the Christian church. This is the traditional church. And to have a Christian church without Peter and Paul embracing each other and being connected and in unity with one another is not to have the Christian church as we know it. It's some other kind of heretical group. A lot of Marcionism, I think, maybe. gets rid of all Paul's epistles. But no, this is a great thing. Peter and Paul, this is a part of the Christian tradition. And if you just want to be one of these, well, I just want to read the Gospels and I don't like all the rest of it, or I just want to read the red letters in the Gospels and not the rest of it, yeah, you're going down a bad road. You've got to do what the church has always traditionally taught. Because if you go down that road, pretty soon you won't be Trinitarian. Pretty soon you won't believe in traditional beliefs to fight modernism. Pretty soon you'll be LGBT. If you go down that road, pretty soon you won't believe in historic Christianity, creationism, etc. That's the way it goes. So Peter and Paul embracing one another. One other thing I want to mention about this is that there's it's also good to see Peter and Paul embracing in that icon, because there's a story about Peter and Paul. We don't have many stories about Peter and Paul, but we've got a heck of a story about Peter and Paul in Galatians. I think it's 2 and 3. You have to look it up. People don't know about it because it's not in the book of Acts or in the Gospels, which is story time. But in the epistle to the Galatians, Paul recounts the story of where Peter got off the reservation. He started showing favoritism. He was hanging out with the Jews who thought they were morally superior to the Greeks and to the Gentiles, and who had a lot of money. That's not too much different than today, is it? And Peter got to the point where he wouldn't eat with the Gentiles, he'd just eat with the Jews, and he started playing favorites. Well, Paul was abhorred by this. He thought it was terrible. And so he stands up in public in front of everybody, and he rebukes Peter for showing favoritism. And Peter repents. I think it's on the spot. I can't prove that. I can't remember. But he eventually repents and says, you're right, I shouldn't be showing favoritism. Jew and Gentile are just the same. And eventually there is no Jew or Gentile. It's just Christian. That's a story for another day. But that's a heck of a story. And it's a key story. And once again, it's important that we have the icon of Peter and Paul embracing and loving each other and being in unity, because they weren't always perfectly unified. They had some tough stretches. Daggone it. All right. Can't take comments today, but if you have questions or comments, go ahead and make them, and I'll answer them personally later. Maybe in tomorrow's podcast, I'll address them publicly as well. Like and share. I'm bringing sanity to an insane world, but we're not done yet. We have the topic of Mary Ingalls Draper. Let's talk about Mary Ingalls Draper. I think I'll call her Mary Draper for the rest of this podcast. Okay. She lived in the 1750s. She was kind of near my people, Stephen Arnold, my seventh great grandfather. Only about 40 miles away in southwestern Virginia. And Mary Draper was just, living in a cabin with a couple of boys and a husband and a mother and a mother-in-law, and just a handful of European settlers scattered around the mountains at the edge of the Indian frontier. And they get attacked by Indians. And her mother is killed. I think her mother-in-law is killed. I think one of her children is killed. And she and two of her boys are taken captive. Her husband was out hunting, so he escaped getting killed by these Indians. They take her captive, a couple of her boys. I think they get separated right away. And she gets taken 500 or 600 miles up the river, the New River. I just crossed the New River just a few minutes ago, so I'm right in that area. She and her husband operated a ferry across the New River, and I'm imagining my Arnolds went across that ferry more than once, and they probably knew the Ingalls. Of course, they also had a tavern and different things like that, so they probably knew Mary Ingalls Draper, Mary Draper. But anyway, so Mary Draper gets taken all the way up to Ohio somewhere by these Indians. 500 miles. And there's this German woman who also got captured by the Indians. So she and Mary gets talking, and they decide they're going to make a break for it. Well, the Indians, people never did that, so they weren't really too worried about that happening. So one night, off they go, running off and escaping. And the pursuit wasn't too hard because the Indians just didn't think they had much of a chance of it. Well, off they go. And I think they got one tomahawk that they didn't have for very long. They had a couple blankets that they didn't last for very long. And she and this German woman, they just find the river that they came up on, and they just start following the river back to home. Well, the reason I got acquainted with this story, there's a book called Follow the River by James Alexander Thom, Thom. Little novel, little paperback. Great book. I really enjoyed it. Most of it was a little bit monotonous. It's the adventure story of going back. But it's okay. But, you can only talk about the winding around the river and stepping over some rocks and some water so many times. But he did a pretty good job. But I can recommend the book. So they go and go and go, and I think it's in the winter. They're cold and stuff, and they're eating wild berries and roots, sassafras, and anything they can find. And it's not pretty, and they're hungry. It gets worse and worse as winter comes on, and they're getting closer and closer to home, maybe 50 miles. But it's looking bleak, and they don't know they're 50 miles away. And this German woman the hunger starts to really work on her. And right near the book, the German woman tries to kill Mary so she can eat her. And so Mary has to run the woman and get away from her. And finally she stumbles across a couple of hunters who are like, "Is that you, Miss Draper?" And they take her back home. Well, Mary Ingalls Draper was 27 at the time. This happened in 1755. My seventh great grandfather appeared on the scene in 1742, so they were somewhat contemporaries. Anyway, she was 27 when this happened, and they said when she returned, her dark brown hair had become completely white. So the trauma of the situation had turned her hair completely white, which is just fascinating. The guy who wrote the novel Follow the River, he has an apocryphal ending that I found to be enjoyable, where George Washington comes to visit Mary, and he asks her lots of questions about her adventure. She's still in the bed recuperating, I think, but basically what Mr. Thom, Thom, is theorizing is that George Washington would have been in his surveyor days, going all across the Ohio Valley and everywhere, surveying land. And if he wanted to know, what Mary had seen and what she could report, so that as a surveyor, he could go out and find various places and landmarks and do his surveying bid. And so I thought that was a pretty decent theory. It made a nice ending to the book. Now, if you go to Radford, Virginia, which is kind of the town closest to where Mary Draper and her husband had their ferry across the New River, Go to Radford, one of the exits off the river. You're going to find a statue. And they built a statue to Mary Draper. And I think there's another one in front of some courthouse or something. I saw one online. So there's a couple of statues of this remarkable woman. Why don't we hear more about this story? Why don't we know more about Mary English Draper? I don't know the answer to that question. I was thinking about it earlier, and one thing that came to me is that maybe it's just not popular right now to talk about European settlers interacting with Indians like that you want to see it to be more of an Indian hero story instead of an Anglo-Saxon, Scotch-Irish, white settler hero story. I mean, that might be it. But you think that the feministic side of it, the strong woman who does such an amazing thing, you think that would help it get the light of the day. And that's probably why we got a couple of Mary Draper statues out there. But anyway, I think her story should be more well known. I think it's fantastic, and I'm happy to tell it to you today. I think I've shared everything that I want to share about Mary Draper. It's the feast of the apostles today. Peter and Paul embracing one another, key to the development of the historic Christian church. Vote for me, DeanArnoldForCongress.com. Give to my campaign. It is June. Oh, I haven't said that. Have I said that yet? It's June 29th. It is June 29th, and I'm not sure that I said that at the beginning of the podcast, and it's important for me to say that. Oh, well, I've said it now. It's June 29th. And I got a list of things I always try to say at the end, and I think I've got them. And now, guess I'm going to try to do the music, although that's easier said than done. See a little stretch up here. That might be a good place to do that. Let's see how it goes. The cigar is working well. A little longer and thinner. Notice that? That is my preference for cigars. And I got this at a place called the Milan Tobacconist Shop in Roanoke. And they have a pretty good selection of cigars. I'm pretty happy about that. All right. Let me pull over right here. And let's see if we can do the music. I'm not sure we can, but we're going to try. Okay. I've got to do that. And I've got to do this. I'm going to do that.
Being Arnold.
Yeah, I think we're having it. Enjoy it, guys.